Yeah, hello and good afternoon to our webinar to the One Identity Fabric. This webinar is a joint venture by IC Consult and One Identity. So next, so just to start, quick housekeeping for all of us. You all have been muted and there's also no way of unmuting yourself, and the session will be recorded. After this meeting, we will share a link to the recording of this webinar in a few days. And yeah, at the end of this meeting, we will have additional time, 10 or 15 minutes for any questions coming up. So, yeah, my name is Ralph Fabian, lead consultant of Identity and Access Management and IT Security at IC Consult. I've been working in the IT infrastructure for approximately 25 years, and since 2011, I've been working at IC Consult in access management and identity management, architecture consulting, and as well implementation in the areas of single sign-on, federation, MFA, and other topics. And for the past few years, I've been product manager at IC Consult for OneLogin. With me is Thorsten Westphal, a pre-sales engineer EMEA from One Identity. Please, Thorsten, some words to you.
Yeah, hello and good afternoon from my side. Thorsten Westphal here. I'm a pre-sales engineer with One Identity. 4 years ago, I started with OneLogin, and then, as you might know, we have been bought by One Identity, and it's my great pleasure here today to show you around the solution and maybe give you some ideas, what logging can do and how it can help, solving quite interesting use cases. Back to you, Ralph.
Yeah, thank you, Thorsten. So, next slide. Yeah, just I would like to give you a brief overview over IC Consult for those who do not know yet us. IC Consult was founded in 1997 for IT consulting, system integration, and managed service with focus only on identity and access management. Currently, we have more than 850 employees working globally with more than 20 offices worldwide, including Germany, which was the headquarters, Switzerland, Austria, France, UK, USA, Canada, India, and China. When we started at the identity and access management market with IAM consulting and strategy development, system integration, and architecture design in the automotive industry, that was our base and yeah, the most important industry. Later, we also focused on support, operation, and managed identity and access management systems. IC Consult is vendor independent, but maintains strong and premium partnerships with leading identity and access management providers like One Identity. Please check out our website about IC Consult partners, vendors, and you can also see there some customer success stories. So as the agenda for today's session, this is the final part of our One Identity Fabric webinar series. And we put the spotlight here in this session on access management, the key to balancing strong security with seamless user experiences across hybrid and multi-cloud environments. Whether users are remote users, employees, or internals, or third-party, modern organizations need a centralized way to manage authentication, also authorization, which is the second part, and access without adding complexity or friction. And access management is one identity fabric. This is the key to balance strong security with seamless user experiences across these environments. And we also take focus on this centralized authentication and authorization, where the users are remote or so, or we can also, with our solution, simplify the access control across hybrid and multi-cloud environments with things done on strong authentication, this unified policy enforcement, to improve and enhance user experience, and also one login is also the foundation for zero trust. So I have here a slide from Kupping-Cole, an analyst, well known like Gartner or others here in this area. So, and they provided this view to the architecture for an identity fabric. So, but the question, what is identity fabric and why is this is so important? So as identity data has become a prime attack surface, traditional identity and access management models are reaching their limits, especially for hybrid and dynamic IT environments. And the identity fabric brings order to this chaos of distributed identities by combining control, scalability, and user centricity. The question, or more, no, not the question, the challenge for this is we have fragmented identities, a lot of silos and cloud service, IoT, Internet of Things, mobile devices, and third-party providers create a multitude of digital identities. And this leads to that silos that pose security risks. So, and some of Kupping-Cole studies show that 90% of companies cite fragmented identities as a major issue. And what is now an identity fabric? It's a mesh of interoperable identity services, not based on these monolithic tools, but on modular orchestrated components. So, and the abstraction layer simplifies integration of new services, and as well, zero code connectors reduce effort and error of risk. The goal is the transparency and centralized control with distributed management with one login. So we have also some architecture principles like that distributed governance and the centralized control. Zero trust is always the access is continually validated based on context and risk. And we also now can say it's all about identity and machine learning. That's also new technologies. We can provide this for anomaly detection and adaptive security measures. So what is the benefit for the organization here? We can improve the compliance and reporting tasks with full traceability for regulated industries. We can improve productivity with self-service features, passwordless authentication, and as well adaptive access management. There's also a strong part for strategic modularity in this platform, that existing systems remain in place and integration happens step by step. So my conclusion to that is identity fabric is not a product, but an architectural vision that unites security, integration, and scalability. It also creates a central single source of truth for identities and reduces, at the end, long-term operation costs. So now going to the next part for one login, I now hand over to Thorsten.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot, Ralph. And that slide, I really would like to have a copy because that is tremendously useful to explain, why we are considering, multiple solutions which are modular. Now, if we look at one logging, next slide, please. Just a little bit of history. Now, this has been over 15 years now that one logging exists, and it really has proven its purpose and its benefits across all verticals. Right? We have more than 5,500 clients, leading enterprises worldwide, which use our authentication services, SSO, and much more. And as you will see, this is a highly flexible solution which would accommodate, as I said, specific use cases or standard use cases as we're going to discover. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the overview of the One Identity portfolio with the main products we propose: identity access management, governance, privilege access management, and AD management. And OneLogging as being the latest addition to this offering into a rather, let's say, on-premise world. OneLogging is a pure SaaS solution, right? But the nice thing is that as OneLogging was designed to bridge the gap between on-premise AD-based authentication and the exploding quantity of cloud and SaaS applications, well, this is precisely the missing link, I would dare to say. What makes this interesting is that we can interface OneLogging with any other One Identity solution. You might have already seen this in the other webinars before. Right? We have privileged integration with Identity Manager. We have privileged integration with Safeguard for privileged passwords or even active roles. The great thing is here that we share information that particularly OneLogging can see due to the access management part in terms of risks, untrusted connections or failed connections, attacking events, or bad actors trying to brute force their way into the portal, for example. This all is traced in the logs, and that can then be shared with other solutions and acted upon. So although it's modular, there's still a great way of integration, and as we go forward, this will of course be enhanced to make it even easier to share information, and configure the solution to be even more flexible and more efficient when it comes to integration and setup, basically providing a mesh or a fabric to cover all aspects of identity management. Next slide, please. So what we're today looking at is really the access management side of things. So concepts like single sign-on, advanced directory integration, meaning that we can integrate multiple and very diverse directories as sources of truth. MFA, of course, which in my opinion is no longer a luxury, but an absolute must. Right? We have learned that usernames and password do not suffice anymore. We need additional MFA, and we have a way of providing integration very easily through open standards. As Ralph mentioned, AI-based adaptive authentication, bringing in artificial intelligence is absolutely mandatory today for companies taking this serious. OneLogging has been a pioneer for over 5 years now, proposing AI-based adaptive authentication, taking into account context-based authentication requests, for example. Lifecycle management is something that comes up very often, especially if we have applications that we need to provision users in or out of, making the administrator's life much easier. Now, OneLogging uses, again, standard protocols here, such as SCIM or REST connectors to provide this service. And it's something that we see in high demand, especially companies moving from on-premise applications to the cloud. Again, here this is an absolute benefit that we're going to look at. OneLogging, being very flexible, can also propose environments for testing, Q&A, giving you all the flexibility to extend and integrate other application solutions or even third-party providers, right, through APIs and toolkits. And then, very important, and this is something Ralph mentioned as well, is that you get central overview of what is going on in your tenant or in your platform, who's trying to gain access, where are problems we see, failed authentication. Again, a centralized view of access request and application access. So with this, obviously, now this fills exactly into the line that we've have been discussing before, and we're going to look at this today: zero trust, how we manage users, and how we keep data synced across different directories. There's so much more that OneLogin can offer. That meets the first eye or the first impression, and hopefully we can touch down on this today, given the 1 hour we have. Next slide, please. So for those who are not familiar with OneLogin, as mentioned, it is a 100% cloud solution. We currently have 2 shards, and we're present in 4 regions. For European or EMEA customers, or everyone who wishes, we can of course run this out of Frankfurt and Dublin. Data cannot be sent to the US, where we have a region in Ohio and Oregon. So data protection, data privacy is something we take extremely serious, and it's by design that the customer has the choice of being hosted in the EU at no additional cost, and then we make sure that this is all compliant with current regulation. Do feel free to visit the onelogin.com/trust page, and we also have the onelogin.com/status page, where you can see exactly what is going on in the platform, and the service health and any information that you need, in order for your data privacy requirements. Next slide, please. Okay, just a brief overview of how this works and how this is architectured. So we have in our middle our universal directory, which can feed in information such as user information, application information, security information. These, I'd say, are the 3 pillars of OneLogin. Starting with user information, this can be anything from employee data or identities to maybe contractors, partners, or even end customers. What is important is that OneLogin caters to all sorts of identities, and this can even be, strictly workforce or strictly, external partner or customers, end customers. So it's workforce and customer identity access management, and there we do not differentiate in terms of functionality or the product. It's the same product. This can cater to all sorts of scenarios, which I think is quite interesting, because as you will see, it's very straightforward, very easy to onboard, very easy to deploy, and of course you can configure the solution for these populations. Information can come from any sort, like Active Directory or LDAP, where we have designated connectors that we could install on-premise. And by the way, these are the only things that we would deploy on-premise, as the rest of the solution is 100% SaaS. But we can also bring in data from cloud providers like Google or Entra, or any other identity source, such as HR software, or maybe CRM systems that we can talk to through REST connectors. And we can synchronize user information, making sure that the information is being updated evenly across the installation. And once we have the user data in our directory, well, we look at their attributes. And thanks to these attributes, we're going to run profiling through what we call mappings. Some call them workflows, we call them mappings, but it's basically to say that if a certain condition is true, then the user could receive a security setting or an application access through roles, and of course, determining how he should log in, what type of MFA, what session management, and much more. Right? The aim, of course, is to connect the user, once he's authenticated, into application. Now, application can be public cloud application, just mentioning the big ones like Salesforce or Google or Office and whatnot. It could be a bespoke application that you develop, and you want to authenticate users centrally for, let's say, a mobile application or a custom website. Right? We use authentication protocols like SAML or OpenID Connect, right, to make sure that this is the most elegant, most secure, most efficient way to authenticate users. Application can also be on-premise. The only limitation I would say we have today is that an application needs to be, webinized or webbable. We cannot authenticate users onto a desktop with a Windows 32-bit or 64-bit application interface. That is not what OneLogin has been designed for. It's for web application. But if it's a web application that runs on-premise and the client browser is in the same network, well, then there should be no trouble to authenticate the user. Since this is all web, well, it works from any endpoint, desktop, mobile, handheld, right, on any platform. And as we take full advantage in terms of architecture, this being all microservices, well, it's highly reliable as we can, multiply instances or, reach spread out, spread up, making sure that we always offer the best solution in terms of performance and availability. And with that, I think this is the last slide, right? I would share my screen if I can manage that. So, share screen. Yes. I know the entire screen. Yep. Okay. So I'm just going to hide this. Okay. So you should see something that says OneLogin by one identity and username, right? Can you confirm, Ralph?
Yes.
Perfect. So this is what a OneLogin tenant could look like, right? We have a subdomain accessible obviously through URL in any browser, any device that has an internet connection, and this is really the only thing we really need, an internet connection. Users, just to show you, can come from different sources. So in this case, this is an AD user, and we have an agent that we can now use to validate the AD password, right? It's optional to cache the passwords in OneLogin. Should your AD not be available, users could still authenticate through OneLogin, but again, this is entirely configurable. Since we now know who the user is, right, we can apply security settings through security policies. And in this case, we would ask for MFA. Again, this is an optional step, highly recommended, right? And we could actually change the way the user authenticates. We could omit the password and go directly to the MFA method. Now, as this user belongs to a certain group of user, we can then determine that he has a choice of different MFA methods. I think this is highly interesting, as not everyone's the same, and not everyone has the same requirements in terms of security. But we make it as simple as possible. So what you see here is different options this user has enrolled into. OneLogin Protect being an application very similar to authenticators that you can see around. We have biometrics, push notification, number matching. All this is native functionality in OneLogin Protect. Windows Hello, YubiKey, these are just examples of what the user could enroll to if you as an administrator configure them. I can't use Windows Hello here because my camera is running, so I'm just going to use the YubiKey. And this is the old model. I just press my YubiKey and then I'm being let in. Again, reducing friction, making it as simple as possible, because we know that users don't like complexity, or multiple MFA. It's called OneLogin because we authenticate once, providing MFA or whatever has been decided on the security side, and then we gain access to what we call the portal, and the portal obviously has all the applications I as a user am entitled to, right? The aim here is again to make it as simple as possible. If I look, for example, for Outlook, well, since we have authenticated and federated this domain, no more question asked, typical single sign-on, very easy. Now, I'm sure you already heard about federation, taking over the authentication process. Yes, OneLogin can do that perfectly well with all, I'd say, major players on the market. Any IDP that can trust OneLogin, we can also trust the IDP. There are different ways we can configure this. Obviously, when OneLogging authenticates a user, then we have to authenticate, for example, the password, and we would impose eventually our MFA method. Right? Everything that is configured is a choice, but it also depends on who's connecting from where. The idea again is that we funnel the user through the portal, giving him relatively little options apart of going onto the application. Password management, for example, security factor enrollment, and as you can see, this is very simple. User can pick and choose from whatever the user or the administrator has configured. Things like email, SMS, even security questions or hardware tokens to that effect. OneLogging works with a browser extension, which you see up here. And this is typically for applications that do not use SAML or OpenID Connect. The example you've just seen with Microsoft Outlook here is SAML-based. So the idea is that we do not send a password anymore. We simply send an ID, eventually some other parameters, and that matches the user on the other side. Obviously, since we don't send a password anymore, there's no need to maintain a password. That is one of the major advantages we have here with OneLogging. We can change the password in one environment. In this case, could be AD, but it could also be locally in OneLogging, and all the other applications would still continue to work without the hassle having to go through a password change for every application. Therefore, we strive for applications that use SAML or OpenID Connect, and would always suggest taking this option. Now, sometimes, actually a lot of times, editors do not propose SAML or OpenID Connect SSO options, but they still insist on using form-based applications, like, let's say, LinkedIn. Now, OneLogging proposes through the browser extension the possibility to send user information such as email or username and a password stored in the OneLogging database and cached and sorted and encrypted, of course, to the application. The effect is that this browser extension works like a password manager, where we send the user to the target login page, fill in automatically the credentials, and log him in. Now, this has been done so fast that we won't even see this. Okay, so keep in mind there are three ways we can connect the user through SAML, OpenID Connect, and what we call form-based application. Obviously, we prefer the later two. How do we all configure this? Well, it's super simple. OneLogging has an administrative interface, which is exactly the same tenant, and I, as an admin, would need administrative rights to do so. Usually we start with directories, and we would pick and choose directories from wherever we want to synchronize with the solution. Directories can be things like Active Directory, where we have a real-time connector, meaning that if something changes in the OU that we monitor, maybe a user has been created, a user has been given additional group membership, or a user has been disabled by the Active Directory manager or administrator, this will be reflected immediately in OneLogging. There is no 15-minute wait. This is in real time, and this is quite important because 15 minutes can be very long. Let's say if you have a disgruntled user that just connects and copies data or still has access to data that he shouldn't have. This distinguishes OneLogging to its competitors. It's real-time update, and let's say a user is disabled, he will immediately lose access to any application that is configured through OneLogging. Google Workspace, LDAP through connectors, or HR-driven identity, and newly the generic REST connector, meaning that we can now communicate directly from OneLogging to anything that has an API interface and it's reachable, let's say, over port 443. So this comes very handy if you have HR systems or other directories for which we do not have a pre-configured connector, but you want to integrate. Also, keep in mind that now this is cloud born in the cloud for the cloud. So we are anticipating HR flow, meaning that nowadays we can create users coming directly from HR software, right? Independently if you have an Active Directory or just a cloud directory at your present time. Once the users are created in one logging, we can then have attributes, and attributes can be added into one logging, right? Besides those 9 ones we have here. I've added custom fields because I need to hold specific data, data that would serve, for example, in third-party application, or data that is historical, like maybe badge ID, or a CRM identification number that I can reuse to connect the user to the CRM software. Right? There's absolutely no limit in the number of custom fields you can add and use to either map user data or even transform user data. We have directory details, and most importantly, we can retrieve information such as user group membership. Now, all this is very basic, you'd say. Yes, it is, but it is highly efficient. For example, on a user, we can see who is the authentication authority. In this case, we would authenticate the user against Active Directory. Right? If the user changes the password, we can write this through Active Directory, and he could change the password in Active Directory for all the Active Directory related services and one login. But we could change this at any moment, saying, no, we want this to be handled in one login. So in this case, the user has to provide a password in one login. For a clearer view in what type of MFA methods the user uses, well, we have the list here. We can even generate temporary tokens should any of these not be available. This is something we highly appreciate by administrators, a clear view of what the user has actually access to. And trust me, you could generate reports showing exactly what the user accesses and also in the which identity, because this is an email, but you could, for example, have a user number or an employee number or a truncated identity or just a username or something completely different. This is the flexibility that we achieve through application integration. And I might not have mentioned this, we have over 8,000 different connectors already in the system. So adding applications, and by the way, there's absolutely no limit on the amount of application you can add, is very simple. Now, as I said, we use SAML OpenID Connect. If we take just an example of Office, we have the possibility to add way more information to a simple Office connector than username or password, which again, we wouldn't need in a SAML OpenID Connect configuration. As we work here on the API level, right, these are the fields I can transmit sort of, in this case, mandatory. But this is all the information, the additional information that I can fill in and transfer to Entra. Right? In this case, we are also enabling provisioning, meaning that we're going to create the user in one login and in Entra or in Salesforce or in Slack or all of these applications that use Skim or REST. The day the user loses access to the role, but this is the way how we distribute this application through roles, right? Then he will immediately be removed, as we can either disable the account or delete the account from the application. Again, thinking of joiner, mover, leaver makes it very easy and almost fully automated to keep track with user and access to application. Let's talk a little bit about application access. We use role-based access, which means that we have roles into which we put applications, or we can use roles simply as logical containers. Right? A user will then receive the role rather than just an application manually. To do this, we use mappings. I've mentioned these before. These are workflows or as I say, logic checkers, right? Because we can simply look at a very basic condition. If the user is member of, let's say, an ID, in a group called RDP, well, then we would give him access to the RDP role. This, of course, can be much more granular, more complicated. We can stack conditions and actions, of course. Right? But the idea is that every time a user is created or changed, well, we run through these mappings. Right? And these mappings then add a user to role or a group or change something in the user profile or remove these roles. So let's say a user is removed from a group in AD. Well, in that case, we would also and instantly remove him from the role in OneLogin. Right? And so the user will no longer have access to the application. Just to show you how highly dynamic this can be, I have a role here called one identity client, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, one identity user, which comprises 4 applications. If I, on my user side, click on one identity, well, for the time being, this is one application. Let's change that. Give the user the role, save it. And if I now run the same query on the portal side, well, we should have immediately our additional application. Right, as simple as that. And the great thing is that these are all pre-configured, meaning that the user does not even need to know any login credentials. And this is an example of a form-based application where we transmit through the browser extension the AD credentials. See, as simple as that. Now, talking about security, which I mentioned is the third pillar, security starts with authentication factors, and OneLogin allows you tremendous flexibility in what you want to integrate. Sometimes it might be necessary, just to use security questions, although they are inherently insecure, but we might not have another choice. So the idea is that we start by creating new authentication factors, and these are all out of the box. I say so. OneLogin Protect is our application. Of course, SMS support. We do not send out SMS, so we would rely on third-party SMS provider, communication provider. Security questions, as seen. WebAuthn, that is everything that's biometrics. So everything that uses, let's say, FIDO2 standards and the WebAuthn protocol to communicate with the browser. Typically, Hello, Face ID, Touch ID, YubiKey 5, or any other device, passkeys that are using these standards. Very preferable in terms of MFA as they reduce the risk of phishing attacks. We have voice services, email, and then, of course, partners such as Authenticator, YubiKey, you've seen that in action. And this one here is particularly interesting as we can use or send the user to a third-party provider to validate either identity, an external MFA, could do a voice check or face recognition as provided by those service providers, and then to have the user come back and be authenticated into OneLogin. Again, in terms of expansion and portability into future systems that we're going to see in terms of MFA, that is certainly a big advantage. Once we have them configured in our list of available MFA methods, we would then go and create policies. And as I mentioned, policies are based on group membership, right? So we have a group, we put the user into a group, and this group would then receive a policy. Policies are particularly important as they determine how the user logs in this case, and just in the example before, we've the standard login flow, right? But we could easily change the way the user logs in, maybe invert, the password, set it after the MFA, and an eventual risk calculation, right? Or go passwordless, skip the password, which is even better because in that case, we don't even bother to have a password anymore. In an ideal world, we don't have passwords, but we have smart devices and an acceptable risk. Now, this risk score here, you can see in this flow. This allows us actually to compute a score, and we call it the risk score. It's from 0 to 100, and if we look at the history, this is the event logging that happens in real time. Pierre here, my favorite user, has been failed to authenticate a year ago because he tried to access from Singapore. So Singapore is very unusual for this user, right? He traveled there in a very high speed, which is humanly impossible, even if you have a teleport. And so one logging adds all these factors, the context of the authentication request, besides things like IP address, geolocation, browser operating system, time, you know, and application access, and calculates this and sets this into context depending on what has been seen for this user. So we're looking basically at the behavior the user adds when, you know, authenticating. Given that the risk score was over a threshold, the system then decided to deny access. But we could configure this in a way that user could be, you know, forced MFA, or we could eventually place him into a different security policy. So ready to enforce even stronger MFA and even more restrictive, let's say, geolocation selection. You can see, again, easy to administer and easy to implement and very easy to maintain. I'm not going through all of these options, but I think it's very important to mention that these different security options we have here, besides, you know, providing a specific MFA method for that specific user group, can be combined, let's say, with device trust. Imagine you only want to allow users to have only access from a certain device, which you trust through a certificate. Well, we can provide that through a small desktop agent that we can deploy, which creates a certificate. If the user is not equipped with this certificate, well, then he will never gain access to the portal or the application, as we use that also in application policies. Furthermore, right, self-service option for MFA management, right, and certain aspects that we could say, well, we could suppress MFA if the user, for example, is in a certain location, IP address based, or if the risk score is really minimal or low. So it's a nice giving and taking between security requirements and user experience, which we think is very, very important. So all this ends up, you know, having a basic configuration. Now, what are, you know, specific use cases? And if we think about, you know, where could this be very easy? Now, you might already have an IDP, you might already use Entra ID, but you might struggle to find an easy way, for example, to invite partners to access certain application. Again, one logging would not necessarily replace an existing IDP, but we could happily live beside them, right? Taking into account that, you know, we trust them, and we could therefore use those identity information to allow user access to an application. And I'm just going to show you a little example of how we proceed. This feature here is called Trusted IDP, and it's extremely useful. We can configure as many external trusted identity providers that use OIDC or SAML. In this case, I have configured Microsoft 365. The idea here is that we have let's say, a service provider, remote IT company, which has to service a specific system. We do not trust everyone in that company, and we would really drill this down to one domain. The side of notice we also have to configure, you know, the Entra connector on their side. But the idea is that they would authenticate with their identity, right? Should the user not be present in our database in OneLogging, well, we can just create them on the fly, right? And there are several attributes, parameters that we can recover in order to grant access. One is member of, as this is an attribute is widely available. So we could filter down on this specific attribute. How does this look like? We'll find out in a second. Just to show you that I don't have a user called Adele here, right? Adele is the user we're going to authenticate. I'm just going to open this up and take a fresh window. So Adele is not present in OneLogging, but she is a user that we authenticate with this trusted IDP, meaning that we're now going to send it to Entra. Entra will then claim, you know, the identity and go on with anything Adele needs to be authenticated by Microsoft, including MFA on the Microsoft side. Since we know that this is a call coming from OneLogin, well, we're going to send the user back. Here we have detected that Adele belongs to a group, and this means that we can now process the creation, but we will also see that she needs to provide MFA, or we impose our MFA on her, because trusting is good, control is better, as we say. In this case, well, we have a diverse choice of different MFA methods, which are completely different from my first user. And again, I'm going to use my YubiKey because I really like it. Small notification here saying you have to accept this. And here we go. So we only offer a certain application for a user that brings his own identity. What happened in the background is that we've now have a user called Adele, and you can see she has a role. And not only that, right? So we know that she has been authenticated by Trusted IDP, and that we are now provisioned her into Safeguard for Privileged Passwords, which is our PAM solution. And so now she can happily access that platform in order to run maintenance tasks supervised and on that platform. Really just a very quick example to see how we could really solve problems you might struggle with, or you do not want to extend or burden your AD or your Entra with this sort of use case. Just looking at the time, we have like 10 minutes. Are there any questions?
Yes, thank you, Thorsten, so far. So we have seen a lot of cool functionalities like the single sign-on, federation, MFA, strong authentication, how OneLogin can act as a federation hub or identity broker. Maybe one question to you, Thorsten. We have shown, or I know it, and there are also some question about branding. So branding for a user login screen. So
Yes.
are there some options here to brand that interface for the login?
Yes, that's a very good. Let me share my screen again. Yes, so absolutely, branding is vital as we're going to funnel the users through the portal, so they should feel at home. You can brand a OneLogin tenant. So let me just log out here. Of course, you can add your colors, your logo, and anything you want. We even have advanced branding where you can add multiple brandings, which are then application based. So let me show you how that looks like. So this is a standard branding. I just took the liberty, having a different branding here. So you can see the tenant name is exactly the same, but we're just changing our visual identity. This is a feature called advanced branding, which is bundled in what we call the expert bundle. And you can create as many brandings as you wish. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. I've seen also a question from Olaf that he's asking here, is AD password always required, or can I use and work with H?
So no, absolutely not. AD password is not required. Do you remember when we said on the user detail, you can determine where the user is being authenticated and by what, who validates the password. It's like a bit, this Lord of the Ring idea where we can only have one source of truth or one validator, right? In this case, my user is validated or authenticated by Active Directory through OneLogin. But of course, if you have different sources, right, you can happily change that through a mapping. What is important though, even if the user is authenticated by another source, let's say another LDAP or Entra, we would still be able to connect them to all the applications that he has access to, because we use sessions and we use SAML and OpenID Connect. This is what makes it so elegant and so secure.
Okay. So there's also a question about the fabric, and it seems that one login interface is looking nearly the same like one identity manager or maybe the PAM portion. So can you explain that? So because some are still confused about that similarity of interface, but I think that's really a cool idea to have it similar working in one login as the access management part, or going to the PAM for privilege access management as well, going to work on the IGA part.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, that's an interesting remark because coming from the one logging side, the IGA interface or the PAM interface, I find them very different in terms of flow and design. Now, since this is the same family now, there is of course how to say work underway. I think to modernize the interfaces and make them familiar. So if you're familiar with one solution, you should be familiar with the other solution. I have absolutely no vision on how long or when that will happen, but yeah, sure, this will all get at how do you say there will be more logic between and more similitude, as we say. Is that even a word? Right.
Yes, I've seen also questions about licensing. So, how is this licensed here? This one login, is it only licensed by active users, or is it also licensed by some bundles with connectors or some tools?
It is very simple. So what we're looking at in one logging is the amount of active users. If coming from a workforce example, so if you go into our website, onelogging.com /pricing, for workforce, for example, we would look at how many users do you have, let's say, an Active Directory, or how many users do you wish to be able to authenticate on a, let's say, daily basis. Once we have that amount, then we would take, we'll ask you what type of features you have or what would you like. And as you can see here, everything I've showed here would be part of the expert bundle, right? Smart factor, risk calculation, desktop. In here we have identity lifecycle management with then provision into other applications. So this varies in price and volume, of course. Whoops. And to make it very easy, so we basically just look at what type of functionality you want and how many users are going to use this. We can also have an a la carte menu where you can pick certain functionalities, right? But again, I think it's way more interesting value and price-wise to have a bundled approach. One logging also caters to CIAM, so customer identity access management, and in that case, we rarely talk hundreds or thousands, but more hundreds of thousands, even millions of users. There's absolutely no problem with that. One login can accommodate as many identities as you wish. The bundles are slightly different, as CIAM use cases in general have different use cases. Again, we have made an effort to make this as simple as possible, and you see, things like how do you say, directory integration, MFA, passwordless, custom domains, if you do want to hide the URL, multiple brands, a developer tenant, a sandbox. All this is already bundled into the CIAM offer.
Okay, also a cool question here. So if AD is the trusted source, does Hello for Business work also?
Yes.
Simple.
Yes. Very, very cool. Oh, I haven't even showed you this. Let me show you something which I think is tremendously useful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So imagine you've learned about trusted IDP and how we can send the user to an external security provider for example, for checking a device, right? You do not want anyone accessing a particular application without being sure that this device is in order. It's about encryption, disk encryption, screensaver or screen lock, and these systems up to date, and much more. So in this small example, I have a security policy which would send me to a third-party provider, which is XFA, Belgian company, startup, and they can run system checks on your device, which is doing right now. I do have a little agent here installed, and it will point out everything that is not compliant with my system. So in this case, I'm missing some updates here, and my screen lock is not configured. Well, if I am part of their policy saying this is all required and you should have resolved that, I wouldn't go any further to that specific application. In my case, I'm taking the risk, just signing in anyway, and I'm being transferred back to OneLogging and gain access to the application. Right? This is the simplicity of integration and the smoothness of a user experience for those things. Right? I think this is very interesting and useful.
Thank you, Thorsten. I think one last question before we go to the end here. So the question was, does login offer access management for Windows, Mac, or Linux, Unix systems? I found one login or one identity introduced this PAM part. Maybe this can help us in this kind of question.
Yes, so it's a bit of a tricky one because we have actually three options here. We have a OneLogging desktop agent, which can provide access management to OneLogging Windows desktops and Macintosh devices. We have Defender, which is One Identity Defender, right, which can provide MFA at the desktop level, only in AD-based environments. And then we have safeguard authentication services for Mac and Linux for AD integration and MFA. Right? So this is part of the overall effort to make things easier in terms of deployment and system integration. Right? As of today, we have three approaches, but they can be configured, and absolutely, OneLogging and Defender can propose common MFA methods. This is actually worth another webinar because you could easily fill out 1 hour on this.
Yeah, okay. So I think we're close to the end. So I can share this one.
Yeah, we're just...
Yeah, and that was the demo part. And so thank you to all of you, to the audience. And as I said before, we will provide that link to the recording so that everybody can review our communication, the slides, and so on. And thank you so much for you. And yeah, also to the audience. So thank you so much.
Have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.